You're listening to the Today's Eden podcast, episode 16. Hey guys, so today I am talking with Shonda Morales, author of the book called Breathe Mama Breathe, which was called a Mom Must Read by Parents Magazine. We talk about mindfulness and not only why it's beneficial for moms to be present, but to help us be more calm and relaxed throughout our day because, who are we kidding? When we have a toddler and teens and just kids running all over and places to be, dinner to make, sometimes relaxing is not the first thing that's on our mind, and we have to regain our cool. And so she tells us how we can handle those situations better and not always be screaming our heads off with awesome, amazing tips. So I'm so excited for you to hear this episode. If you're like me, you have absolutely zero time to sit down and physically read a book, but putting headphones on is pretty easy. You can try Audible for free for 30 days at audibletrial.com/todayseden. Check out some of the books our guests have mentioned on the show that they found most influential. Hey, Shonda, thank you so much for being on the Today's Eden podcast.
Hi, Ashley. Thanks for having me.
Before we talk about your book, which I'm super excited to dive into and go into all the details about, but could you tell us a little bit about you, your family, and what you do?
Sure. So I am a psychotherapist in private practice. I've been in private practice since 2000, and I use a lot of mindfulness-based interventions to work with mostly anxiety and stress-related disorders. I also teach mindfulness meditation, and my family life, I'm married and I have a 15-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son.
Oh, wow. So you have all the spectrums of age or stage.
Yes.
I love that. So what drove you to write Breathe Mama Breathe?
So I started meditating faithfully for a half an hour every morning when my daughter was 3. And when I became pregnant, when my daughter was 10, so 7 years later, I knew that I would not be meditating for a half an hour at a time with a newborn.
Right.
So I needed to figure out some ways to keep mindfulness in my life in short practices that could be really flexible in the midst of a busy life with a newborn and work and everything else that comes along with it. So that combined with, I was teaching mindfulness in my local hospital in a program that recommends learning meditation for 20 or 30 minutes a day. And what I was finding when I would teach people in my office is that they really wanted to practice that long, but they just weren't. So I really thought it was helpful to start with 5 minutes a day. And what I've seen is that it's so much more important to practice every day and start with 5 minutes, which everybody can carve out 5 minutes no matter what's going on in your life. And that is so much more important than 20 minutes once a week or every few weeks.
Like right now, there's a whole kind of rave about meditation, but I think a lot of them do say, it's like 30 minutes. And so I tried that, but I was having to wake up so early in the morning that I just fell off the wagon probably I think I made it 4 days, and then, then I had a busy day, and then it just kind of downward spiraled from there. So when I read that yours was 5 minutes, I'm like, heck yes, I could do that.
Exactly. Right. And that's it, because sometimes we have a longer stretch in the day where we can then build on, and maybe you sit for 10 or 15 minutes, but every day to sit down for 5 minutes really can change how our day feels.
So what exactly is mindfulness?
Right. So mindfulness is very simply paying attention to the present moment with an attitude of kindness and curiosity and acceptance. So instead of being in the future, worrying or imagining or what ifing, or being in the past, so either a long ago memory or a recent conversation, we're right here, right now. And that's so important because we often run on automatic pilot and we miss out on so much. And when we're stressed and overwhelmed, we also tend to overreact to the tough stuff. So with mindfulness, we're able to pause and recognize what's happening in the moment. And then we have a choice in how we respond in situations and also what we want to pay attention to.
Right. And I remember reading in your book, it's that you had said that mindfulness is pulling ourselves out of autopilot and being aware of what is happening right now. And immediately what came to mind, and I know that so many people, not just moms, do this, but when you're driving somewhere and you can't even remember, like you pull up to your destination and then you don't even remember actually driving there.
That's it. Exactly.
So that to me
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that to me is like a huge example of like in a way that I actually probably need to be more mindful of. Obviously, if I'm driving my kids, to where that's almost scary to get somewhere and realize you just drove for however long and you didn't even like consciously be aware of driving.
Right, right. And so how many moments? So that's just sort of neutral moments when we're driving and, especially somewhere that we tend to go on a regular basis. That's when we tend to drift off. But how about all those moments then we miss that we just sort of skate by with our kids or our partners or our friends or just for ourselves that, we miss out on all these possibly beautiful or pleasant moments because we are not really aware of what's happening.
And I think that happens too, which is creating more of a struggle, is our phones. So not only are we like stressed out, but I think that we tend to go to our phones for that kind of break when what you're exampling in your book is, no, here's another way to have kind of a reboot, but without your phone, where you're actually focusing on what's going on around you at the same time.
Oh, yes, yes, please. And I talk about, I think such a beautiful way to bring mindfulness into our day. We'll probably talk about mindful breaks, but one of them is while we're waiting. So how often are we waiting in the grocery line at the grocery store, or waiting for our kids at the carpool or at a doctor's appointment? And what do? When we have a spare moment, we whip our phones out and we start scrolling mindlessly. So what happens if we challenge ourselves gently, but kindly and firmly to not do that? And it's so hard. It's like magnetic. But if we can train ourselves to just look up or just, hey, what's going on in my body and my shoulders? I can drop them and I can unfurl my brow, take a few breaths, or, maybe I look up and I'm outside and I think, wow, I hear the birds singing, the sun shining. And again, all these things we would miss. And it also really changes the feel of our day in that we feel like we need to be doing something at every moment. So when we pause and just allow ourselves to be for 30 seconds, 20 seconds, it totally changes the pace of our day. It feels more relaxed.
Yeah. And I really love that about your book is that, like you said, we'll talk about those breaks later, but that was something that I really loved was that a lot of books have a lot of writing and they talk about what they want to tell you and they just kind of talk about it, but they don't actually show you how to do it or how to apply what they're talking about. And so I really love that your book is kind of the opposite. Like, yes, there's writing and you, explain the concept, but you're majorly explaining the concept through practical application, which for me is huge because I can read a self-help book all day and then still at the end of it have questions about, okay, but how do I do that? Like, how do I do that in my daily life? How do I apply that with my kids? What does that look like? So I love that about your book. But what are some of the benefits to being more mindful that apply to our bodies and our minds?
Oh, so many. So research, there's so much research out there now on mindfulness meditation. And often in studies, what they'll do is the researchers will put people in functional MRI machines and which can track the activity in the brain. So what we now know is that over time, meditation can change the shape and the function of our brain, much like we'd be doing bicep curls to build our bicep. When we meditate, we are building that mindfulness muscle. And the part of our brain which is in charge of planning and kind of organizing our thoughts and attention, the prefrontal cortex, the gray matter, that gets larger in long-term meditators. And the amygdala, which is in charge of fight or flight and reaction and all this emotional sort of overreaction, that gets smaller in long-term meditators. So it's really amazing. There's also been research about our immune function. We can have a heartier immune function with and fight off germs and with meditation. Inflammation, which inflammation is caused by stress, cortisol, this stress hormone in our body. And that causes inflammation, which over time causes all kinds of disease. So overall health and mental health, for sure, we feel calmer and more connected. We kind of don't sweat the small stuff as much. And now there's research about telomeres, which are the end of our chromosomes, which determine how long we live and how healthy we are as we live longer. And meditation is shown to maintain the health of the telomeres longer as well. Those depression, anxiety, sleep, all kinds of things that it helps with.
That's so crazy and so great that just a few, like literally a few breaths are so impactful and can be so like life-changing internally to our bodies. That's so amazing.
I agree.
So how can this transform the connection that we have with our families? Because I know that you talk about that a little bit in your book, but I just kind of want to talk about how this mindfulness can help us be more connected with our family and help the flow of our day.
So in the book, I talk about, there's this one story when my son, my kids are 10 years apart. So my daughter was 10, I had my son. And as we know, little ones demand so much of our time and attention, and he's adorable and funny, and so the one day I had a cold, and I was so I kind of slowed down a little bit. I put him up for a nap, and my daughter and I were sitting out back and just chatting. We weren't doing anything because I just wasn't feeling that well. And I looked over at her, and she was probably 12 or 11 or 12 at the time, and all of a sudden I looked in her eyes and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know when the last time was. I sat and just looked in her beautiful eyes, and it just sort of broke my heart because, I don't think of myself as a bad mom, but it was one of those moments like, oh my gosh, I was missing this and I didn't even know it. So mindfulness helps us pause more and really connect. So as simple as looking in their eyes or hugging more often, and it just slows us down so we're not this whirling dervish running around that they can't even catch our attention. How can we be connected if we're not paying attention?
Right.
So it really does remind us to pause, and then it really brings us back to what matters most, which is often connection.
I can't remember the exact wording, but I had heard somewhere that like basically our whole functioning is based on, we have a desire to be connected, whether that's like with, our family members or just people in general. Like the human race desires connection. So how much more would we want that connection with our family?
Say one way that a lot of people love to connect with their kids is the 3-breath hug that I talk about in the book. And that is, we can teach this to our kids or even our partners, but kind of a big bear hug, and then you take 3 long, slow, deliberate breaths together, and just 3 times. And that is just such a beautiful way. We can calm our kids that way or just connect. And, and I tell the story about how I had taught that to my daughter, and when she was about 5, I was having a mommy meltdown and in the bathroom, kind of like, I need a moment. And she knew it. And she slipped a note under the door that said, meet me in my room for a 3-breath hug. Aww. And it was just so sweet. She knew when I needed one too. So now my son will tell me or ask if I need one too.
So yeah, we do something similar. So when our son is getting frustrated, we see it more in him than our daughter, but he is very quick to get frustrated or quick to anger. And so what we've been doing is, we say, We ask him to stand up and to control his body, and then we ask him to take a couple deep breaths. But I love that with yours, it's like specific. So it's like, let's take 3 deep breaths together, and we're hugging together. I feel like that there's something about the hug that would probably be better than just like them doing it on their own, maybe.
Right, and some of both. So, and again, to not doesn't need to be done when there's a meltdown. It could be any time, but it is also helpful in a meltdown because, right, we need to calm ourselves before we can think clearly, and that's the first step. So, so sometimes, yeah, I mean, kids, ideally, we want to teach them how to do that on their own, but sometimes it's nice to do it with them.
So, how would you say that we could start? So, if we've read your book. And we want to start applying some of these principles into our life, but we're like a baby beginner. How would you say that we can set ourselves up for success with these new techniques that we're learning, and then also include our families?
Okay, so number one is that 5 minutes a day of meditation. And it's really helpful when you get started to have a voice guiding you. So whether you go to my website and I have a 5-minute meditation that you can download, or any other resources online that are free. But it is helpful in the beginning to have a voice that brings you back. So guided meditation for 5 minutes a day. It's helpful to, I offer a mindful log so you can track every day and just kind of keep yourself accountable. And then maybe pick 1 or 2 mindful breaks a day that you could either pick 1 mindful break and do that for the week, or pick 1 or 2 different mindful breaks each day. And which is just to, in addition to the meditation, throughout my day. So when I'm in the shower, or I'm prepping dinner, or I'm reading books to my kids, you pick 1 time when you're going to just bring your full attention to that moment and deliberately be there for that time. So then you can add on and sprinkle in more mindful breaks throughout your day so that it becomes a little more seamless. And that's a great way to get started. And with kids, by all means, people ask me, so if I meditate with my kids, then that's my meditation for the day. And it's always different with our kids. So by all means, teach your kids if you want and if they're willing. But by all means, carve out that time for yourself and be able to have that time just to practice meditation by yourself as well. But a lot of the mindful breaks in the book can be done with kids, that we can teach them how to be aware of their bodies, name body sensations, like, wow, my belly I feel like there's a tickle in my belly, or I feel like my chest feels a little heavy, or all kinds of things. My shoulders are raised. Can I drop them down? And we can help with our senses, our 5 senses of sight and hearing. We can just pause at any time in the day, especially if we're outside. What am I hearing right now? What do you see? What do you notice? So that's training kids in a fun way to be more mindful in their day as well.
Yeah, and I love that in your book you said our kids sense and absorb our moods, including levels of stress. And that is so true. Yeah, so I feel like when as moms we're frustrated, then I feel like our kids are irritable. So then it's just kind of like we're both getting to this peak, where emotions are high and the volcano is about to erupt, and we kind of feed off of each other. So how can we start to, so we're going to show our kids that we're doing these practices and hopefully they kind of catch on. But I think that at the beginning, it's almost safe to say that a lot of families with anything new, when you start implementing anything new, it's kind of awkward because you're doing something new and you feel awkward and they're like, what are you doing? So how would you say that you would address or tell the kids or introduce this to the kids?
So I think you don't make a big deal out of it and you just say, you know what? I need to go take a time out. I'm going to go take 3 breaths, or I'm going to go breathe for a few minutes and quiet myself down. Or I'm feeling like my jaw is tense and my fists are tight. And that's a signal for me that I need to go breathe and calm my body down. So, we model that. And as long as we just kind of name it, it's not so strange. It's not so foreign. Or we can even sit down and be mindful before a meal. So if we say grace or have gratitude before dinner, we can also say, so let's just talk about, what do you notice? What does your food look like? What are the colors? What does it feel like in your mouth, that texture? And what are the smells? So it can be very playful. If we're just not making it so serious,
Yeah.
they won't think it's that strange, I don't think. And they're ripe for it, and they're right there with us.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I guess that's true. Like, it doesn't have to be a serious thing. It's just, but yeah, so talking about those mindful breaks, just to name a few, there's a coffee break, which is a good idea. I love that. And then, and then a shower break, the wine break, which I also was a fan of, the breast and bottle feeding break, which to me, like a lot of these, I feel like are so obvious, but we just don't do it to where I'm like, why didn't I realize that? And then there was the teen tood break, which I think I'm going to need that one eventually. And then my
Yes.
favorites where you had a whole section of self connecting with your self breaks. Because I think that as moms, that's like the thing that we think the furthest from. It's like, okay, I need a break from my toddler. I need a break from the busyness of getting them out the door, from the car line, from the grocery store. But those are like things outside of ourselves versus and that's just kind of the role of the mom, is we service others before we serve ourselves. And so for you to give us practical ways, I think that is really great, and it's going to be really beneficial for a lot of moms.
Right. Thank you. Yes, and I agree. Especially being a therapist, I see this so often, how hard we are on ourselves. I mean, most people are, but moms are just, we take it over the
Yeah.
top with the guilt and the perfectionism and not being good enough and comparing ourselves to others. So yes, I really, it's so helpful I talk about mommy high fives, just like we would say to our kids, good job. I'm so proud of you that you did this or did that. We need to do that for ourselves, because I know I still fall into, I might remember 500 things, and the one time I forget to, pack this or sign this note or something, I'm like, oh my God, how could I forget that? Well, that's because that was the 501st thing. And out of 500, there was one thing you forgot, but we don't give ourselves credit for the 500. So it's being on the lookout for all the positives. And, just being, as best we can, happy with good enough, because good enough is really all our kids need and want. They don't want us to be perfect.
So are there a few breaks that you as a mother and wife have kind of helped yourself, or that you've enjoyed the most or found yourself using the most?
That's a great question. So one of my favorites is waking with gratitude. So before I even get out of bed, my alarm goes off and I snooze it for 5 or 6 minutes, and almost always I can stay awake and I think about everything I'm grateful for. So, I start out with the basics, my health and my kids' health and so forth. And I always try to come up with something new and different, and really to challenge myself. And it's such a nice way to start the day, instead of my to-do list or what I maybe am worried about. It's everything that's good. And then I'm more apt to be on the lookout for more good throughout the day as well. And I think also the mommy high fives, like I mentioned, kind of giving myself credit, because that's an ongoing challenge to have these expectations of myself, and to just take for granted everything that I do. Um, uh, let's see. And I love the 3 breath hugs, like I mentioned, and pleasant moments. So being on the lookout, it kind of goes along with the gratitude, but, like I mentioned, we might walk outside and go to our car and be in our head or thinking about where we're going or our to-do list, and not be at all aware of what's around us. But instead, being on the lookout for pleasant moments, I might pause, and whether I stop or not stop, just notice, and hearing the birds, and seeing the sun, and feeling the breeze on my skin, noticing the leaves or something, that can really transform a neutral moment into something that's really pleasant and really beautiful. So I try to be on the lookout for those as well.
Right. And sometimes I think that when you talk about that sort of thing, it can kind of sound cheesy, like, oh, I'm going to step outside and gaze at the bird, but it really is, even if it's something little and you feel dorky doing it or silly doing it. I mean, really, I think and it might not even have anything to do with the bird that you hear, but the fact that you, for that 1 second, got out of your own head to listen to something else, to where it kind of made a break in your mind or something. And I mean, you know more about this than I do. I'm just taking a guess that that kind of helps us to disconnect from whatever, that just autopilot, like you say, and then kind of like restart us in a way.
Yes, definitely. And there's, I write about this in the book as well. If we really stopped and thought about, if you were told you had 6 months to live, what would matter? So it really wouldn't be that the kitchen is clean and that, you, I don't know, made the perfect cupcakes for the kids' class. It would be that you did notice the sun and the birds, and you connected with your kids and your partner, and you had fun with your friends. Really, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but that's so true, because you hear tons of stories about people who find out that they have a terminal illness, and they talk about how their whole perspective changes, and that everything else doesn't matter. They just want to spend time with the ones they love and do things and be there and be present. So I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So is there a trick to realizing when we need to take those mindful breaths or breaks and then actually doing them?
So the hope is that, so number one, yes, we when we feel that we are tense, and the more we practice the meditation and mindfulness, the more aware we are of subtle body sensations. So we can catch the tension and rising or the stress rising before it hits a level that is sort of danger. So there's that, but also you want to use the mindful breaks proactively. So we're sprinkling our day with mindful breaks so that we stay more calm and even and less reactive. So it's sort of a double-edged sword in a helpful way, that we can pull out some of the mindful breaks when we are stressed, and some of them are used for that. But some of them are also just to enhance life or to keep us feeling more steady and aware and calm.
Do you approach mindful breaks differently with your teen than you do your toddler?
In terms of how I'm doing the mindful breaks or teaching them?
Both. I want to know both.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So, so my daughter, I mean, she's been around this since she was 3. So she has a pretty good working knowledge, and she uses it. Actually, she was at an interview with me yesterday, and they were asking her, and she does. When she's stressed out, she now knows how to really calm herself with her breath and her body over all these years. So yeah, I mean, I think, but you know what though? A lot of it's the same, because whether my daughter is giving me her 15-year-old teenage attitude, which just tightens up all my muscles immediately, or my son is pitching a fit, like a meltdown, it feels very similar in my body, right? It feels very similar in how I feel helpless and frustrated. And so the first part is to calm myself. I need to be aware, first of all, that I'm stressed about it, and then calm myself enough so that I can choose, how do I address her tone of her attitude, and how do I address the fact that he's, on the floor, pounding on the floor or something. So it really, I think, of course, it is a little bit different, but deep down, it's probably a lot the same.
Yeah. I was just curious, just in case anybody, had kids from both ages, that they both knew how to kind of approach it. I guess mainly it's based off of what they see, and then the older one can kind of decide from there how they apply it to their own life, because they have a better understanding of why and what you're doing, whereas the toddler learns majorly everything right now from just watching what we do.
Yes, and that's an important point too. So that when I talk about how to a mindful break about after our meltdown as parents, as moms, because we lose it sometimes, and that feels terrible. And we can get really caught in shame and stay stuck there, which then just perpetuates that sort of yuckiness that happens afterwards. So if we learn to, forgive ourselves and kind of recognize how can I do this better next time when this situation pops up, and then go to make a repair with our child. I'm sorry I didn't handle that very well. What I should have done is gone off and taken a couple of breaths or calmed myself first. We're modeling that, and we're also modeling taking responsibility and that we're not perfect and it's okay, and we can forgive ourselves and they can forgive us, and and move on.
I just wanted to say before we continue, and acknowledge you that I am so glad that you made this book. I, f- I feel like I feel like that a lot of the times, we're told just to relax or just to, calm down. But then for some reason that, like, just if somebody was to tell me that, that would just give me more frustration probably. But having a
yes.
practical application of like you have over 60, I think it's like over 60 mindful breaks listed in your book that tell me, like, I couldn't think of a time that I wouldn't need that in one of those that you listed. So I felt like everything was covered, and that it gave me a practical, instead of just, calm down and, breathe here, but like you went into detail of like, this is what you're going through, this is what your body feels or is probably feeling, and here's how we address that. And I really like that, and I think that that's very powerful for moms, because I feel like today, just like you said, we're the hardest on ourselves, and I feel like anxiety, depression, and all those things that are becoming so high that we're suffering from can be helped if we learn how to actually handle our emotions in a healthier way. So thank you for writing such an awesome book for us.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for that feedback. It's always wonderful to hear.
So I wanted to ask you before we end the recording, I sent you 3 questions ahead of time, and I asked these at the end of every one of my episodes. So the first one I wanted to ask you was, what is the most influential or game-changing book that you've read?
And do you know how hard this question was? Because I love to read. So I have to tell you too. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I could not pick one.
No, that's
So
fine.
I think The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. That is wonderful for especially women, because it talks about giving ourselves permission to be authentic and vulnerable. And as a recovering perfectionist and a recovering pleaser, that was such a helpful book for me. And I think it really helped me open up in my writing to share, to know that, most of us, like you're saying, we can all relate to a lot of these situations and difficulties. And when we normalize that and say, I feel that way too sometimes, that is so empowering and it feels so important. So I love that book. And the other is Everyday Blessings by John and Mila Kabat-Zinn. And that's all about mindful parenting. And that was kind of my introduction to mindful parenting, which such an important piece of that is how our self-awareness as moms impacts our parenting, which is a lot of what we've been talking about today. And also kind of gives you the long view. So when you're stuck in a stage, like my child will never be potty trained, I don't think it's ever going to happen. You remember, like, okay, he's probably not going to go off to college in a diaper. I hope. So it kind of gives you that long view. Right. So those are 2 that I chose.
And then my next question for you was, if you could empower women in one way, what would it be?
So I think it's to recognize that self-doubt and fear is completely normal. We all feel it sometimes. And rather than believe it or avoid it, we should see it as evidence that we're on the right track. So that shows us that something really matters. And maybe we need to face it and recognize the self-doubt and fear and say, yes, I know you're here and I can do this anyway. It's kind of an invitation to go for it in spite of the self-doubt and fear.
That's good.
Thanks. I use it for myself. Yes.
So how do you overcome that, or what do you tell yourself in those moments of that self-doubt or fear?
So I always say, say, hi, I see you, you're here, and kind of, you can have a seat right next to me. It's fine. You're part of what's going on here, but I don't need to listen to you. I'm just going to let you hang out here with me, and I can kind of keep doing my thing. So it becomes not so overwhelming and take over what we're thinking and feeling and doing. It just becomes, yeah, I recognize you're here, but there's a lot else I can keep going anyway.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's so good. I'm like, while you're saying that, I'm envisioning myself telling my own self-doubt to like sit next to me in a chair.
That's right.
If you could tell your younger self one thing, assuming that she'd listen, what would it be?
Would be to follow your curiosity, because it will always lead you in these really cool directions that you can't even imagine, and that you can do anything. So don't let anybody tell you that you can't, because I've been there before too.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because if you hadn't, then the book would probably not exist. And then
That's right.
we would
In
all
fact, I
be
had
stressed out.
that's right. Well, I had somebody tell me, I don't think you don't have enough of a social media presence. I don't think you're ready yet. It's not. And I thought, well, what do I have to lose? Let's do this. So exactly.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, whoever said that was wrong, but because I found you. So, yeah. So speaking of social media, how can we connect with you or find more about you? Or if we want to order, like, where can we find where you're at and your site and everything?
Right. So my website is shondamorales.net. On Facebook and Twitter. And Breathe Mama Breathe, the book, you can find any bookstore, any online bookseller.
Thank you so much, you guys, for listening to this episode. It was awesome. And I am so grateful for Shonda to share some tips on how we can calm the crazy, because that is kind of what I summed up this book as, is tips for how I can control my emotions throughout the day. And it was just awesome. Also, I wanted to share that I am working on creating a Facebook group specifically for today's Eden tribe. So I want it to be a place for conversation where it's not just one-sided. It's not just you guys listening in to me talking to somebody else, but to where we can get together, talk about things, joke about things, and just kind of have a sense of community. So I will keep you updated on where that's coming or where that's going, all those things. You guys, sometimes I say like the most random things, and I just hope that you understand what I mean. So I will keep you updated on that group and where it's at, and hopefully let you know soon when it's open for you to join. To find the show notes for Shonda's episode, you can go to todayseden.com/podcasts, PODCASTS/016 to see all the links to her book, to her website, to find more about her, as well as do all those techie things like subscribing to this podcast or leaving a review, because you're awesome. And I know that you will do that to support me and to support the Today's Eden podcast. So today's quote that I want to leave you with is, "Life is all about balance. You don't always need to be getting stuff done. Sometimes it's perfectly okay and absolutely necessary to shut down, kick back, and do nothing." I am going to work on taking that advice. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you tune in next week.